Well, Spider Man Brand New Day just hit theaters, and obviously the questions that we all gotta ask ourselves after watching really an MCU movie, but if you're a Spider Man fan, specifically a Spider Man movie, how does it stack up against the others in this universe? What did it add? What did it maybe not accomplish? How was the character executed? What was the take on the story of Peter Parker and his alter ego Spider Man? And today, we just have a fan's perspective on that. I threw that in the title because that truly just is what we're here to do today. I'm merely a fan. I'm not some super mega nerd that knows everything, but I'm also, since I was 3 years old, I've been incredibly fond of Spider Man and invested in whatever the character is doing. I kind of say I experience the broader Marvel universe through the lens of Spider Man because so many of the events or happenings I pay attention to specifically because I want to see how Spider-Man fits into the grander narrative. So yeah, that's what we're here to discuss today. I have a huge bias towards the character, but I'm also not afraid to critique what I love, right? So, what is a just casual fan's perspective on this new Spider-Man movie? Of course, with Tom Holland and in the MCU continuity. Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. Likely, if you're clicking on this, you've seen the movie. I wouldn't recommend watching a review style video of a film you have not watched. But obviously, huge spoilers ahead for anyone that is concerned. For a quick movie synopsis, No Way Home left us in a position where basically no one remembers Peter Parker, even his closest friends. Their relationship have been removed, Ned, MJ, like strangers as far as they're concerned, and as far as he's concerned now. Peter Parker is a ghost, and Spider Man is truly a vigilante who no one knows the identity of. And of course, that's all transpiring in No Way Home, so you'd have to watch that to fully understand how we got here. But basically, what's going on is the 4 years of college pass by in a pretty quick montage, with, of course, Peter going it solo, being Spider Man, not dragging anyone else into his web now after May died because of his involvement with her life. And then, of course, MJ getting injuries that he specifically views at the end of No Way Home, confirming his decision to stay out of her life despite promising to remind her of everything. The movie follows Peter Parker as he struggles with a arachnid mutation essentially going on inside of him, where the arachnid portions of his DNA are increasing to dangerous degrees, causing him to act more spider-like essentially. He gains organic webbing, he has these little fits where he's not himself at all. He has skirmishes with several recognizable villains throughout the movie, but the main villain presiding over the narrative is Jean Grey, who's introduced here, and she's telekinetic, psychic, telepath, kind of a mixture of all those things. And she presents the main source of conflict and issues. Of course, that all being sourced back to damage control. But the main antagonist, as far as we're concerned, is Jean Grey, kind of bridging some of the major leaps into the X-Men side of the universe, which is, of course, coming into the MCU. We've all seen the Doomsday trailer. And then, of course, the movie kind of rounds out with him revealing himself to MJ once again. Maybe I feel like it implies she's getting some of her more proper memories back. And of course, Ned, after doing their special little handshake thing, seems to have his memory restored, at least partially, if not fully. So it ends on a little hopeful note that Spider Man is going to reunite with his friends, have that support group once again for Peter Parker, have any kind of social life. And yeah, and it sets up for the next movie. We had a little post-credit scene. We had a Spider-Man will return confirmation. I think we were all pretty sure that was going to happen, but uh, nice to know for sure in the actual official media. And what I'm not here to do primarily is to summarize the movie. Like I said, I'm operating under the assumption you've watched it. I just like to kind of give a little vague plot synopsis so we definitely understand what movie we're talking about going forward. What I want to do today is do a little pros and cons list, a very subjective yet analytical analysis of the things that I did and didn't like about this film. Because, like I said, I'm heavily biased towards Spider Man. Any authentic representation of the character, or at least like writing or narrative that tries to tell a story around the true character of Spider-Man, I'm just going to like it has to be darn bad for me to not be into it at all, whether that be from writing, animation, or character representation. Obviously, I'm not comparing any qualities in some sort of objective scale, but there were certainly things I loved about this movie, and there were certainly things that left me maybe underwhelmed, is the right word to say here. So I guess we'll just get into exactly what those were. We'll begin with the positives. I think that's always the responsible thing to do here to get off on a good note. Obviously, many of the fans, if you've been paying attention to what they say online, I don't very much, but I'm aware of the general vibe that the online space has. They've been wanting a street level Spider Man, something to feel like actually friendly neighborhood. Tom Holland's representation of the character specifically has been going through a lot of more Avengers level threats, right? Whether that be literally going to space and fighting and interacting with Thanos and other high level Marvel characters, or even Mysterio, who had the whole elemental creatures thing. That was a hoax, that was the whole thing was a ruse, but still, for a while, it seemed like he was fighting and interacting with these high level elemental creatures. Then, of course, No Way Home was a multiversal adventure with many of the villains. That was, while that was all Spider-Man centered villains, that was such a high stakes, high scale, broad concept type of story that a lot of fans were left desiring for a more street level Peter Parker in the MCU timeline. And that was certainly delivered to us with Brand New Day. And I certainly put that as one of my top compliments towards the movie. They kept it to the heart of New York City, where Spider Man's kind of famous for being active. They kept the villains, with the exception of Jean Grey, down to a power scale that felt pretty on par with what Spider Man would reasonably be able to handle and fight. And even Jean Grey, the way she used her powers throughout the most of the film wasn't in the most broken way ever. Her powers get broken towards the end of the film, but of course they're really not that effective on Spider-Man, even when she was intensifying it through her emotions and whatnot. So I really think the power scaling, Spider-Man to villain made sense for most of the film, and certainly the environment setting and what is transpiring was a lot more street level than the other Tom Holland movies have been, and that's what a lot of people wanted to see. That's, I got to admit, that's what I wanted to see, and I think that was executed very well. On a similar train of thought, I think from most Spider-Man stories, what people expect or desire is a very character-driven story, specifically on the character of Peter Parker. And that was certainly delivered to us. And it was delivered to us in a way that is in that classic Spider Man dilemma where we have Peter Parker and we have the alter ego of Spider Man, and which is he more? Is Peter more Peter or is he more Spider-Man? That's exemplified in this movie and is, of course, showcased in other films and Spider-Man media time and time again. I think it was done very creatively and well here. It kind of the whole narrative, while it had other characters in it, seemed to be centered around Peter and his isolation, specifically. What is isolated Peter like? We've seen him have a support structure, whether that be mentorship or reliable friends throughout all of the Tom Holland saga thus far. Tony Stark was obviously a father figure. He had Aunt May as a mother figure. Ned was a solid friend for a long time. And of course, Michelle Jones, or MJ, becomes his trusted girlfriend. So this Peter Parker really hasn't suffered much up until No Way Home. He lost, Iron Man, but that, let's be honest, the loss of Iron Man wasn't designed to be a thing that happened to Spider-Man. It was a grander narrative decision for the character of Iron Man, both to the Avengers team and to just the Tony Stark character himself. That event was not. For the most part, I can imagine that event wasn't curated to affect Spider-Man, so it's like different than Aunt May dying. I wouldn't consider Tom Holland's Spider-Man truly suffering for his powers or for being who he is in any real sense, as far as actual tragedy strikes go, until Aunt May dies. And of course, she's the one who actually gets to say, with great power comes great responsibility. All that is that seeing a broke, alone, depressed Peter Parker is kind of what we wanted to see from Tom. And I think doing it in this college era of life was a really good move. Especially because we had that sort of montage at the beginning of it speeding through the years, and you really get an idea of what he's living and what the ramifications and lasting consequences of No Way Home was. I'm a huge fan of strong continuity, and it definitely feels like this was a logical flow from where No Way Home ended to how this movie progressed. And tied into that was the identity crisis. This is something I personally love to see from Spider-Man stories. Uh, Really, probably the most famous version of this comes from Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 2, where of course he gets the web block, right? He's so emotionally distraught and such mental turmoil that he essentially masks his powers. This is directly taken inspiration from the first Amazing Spider-Man annual comic book issue, where he first encounters the Sinister Six. A similar psychosomatic thing was going on within Peter Parker, which was causing his powers to be temporarily blocked from usage. And of course, the most famous representation is, of course, in that second movie of Tobey Maguire where he fights Dr. Octopus. And of course, they use that to propel the character driven narrative forward quite a bit. And it's also used in this movie, but in a very unique way. See, instead of Peter losing his powers, this is actually the catalyst for his arachnid side being exemplified. Of course, he gets organic webbing. He has the whole web cocoon instance. His apartment is covered with cobweb type substance. He loses control. His, either I don't know if his pupils are expanding to cover his entire eyes, or something's just happening to make his eyes all dark. I don't quite know spider anatomy, so maybe there's a reason for that. But he loses full control, like his inhibitors sort of go away, I like to say. His rational thought. He's not himself, clearly, when he's suffering these arachnid spikes and fluctuations. And the way it unfolds, because he does initially get a technological solution through the inhibitor that was similar to what was restraining the Hulk, but towards the end, I don't believe that was what's affecting him anymore. So it's more of a psychosomatic condition, like Spider-Man 2 and like the Amazing Spider-Man annual from the days of old. Except instead of his powers being blocked, they're being exemplified, and the only way he can like control them fully in the right sense once again is through accepting that he's not only Spider-Man, but he's also Peter Parker. That is of course a huge just metaphor, I suppose, for him leaning too far into his Spider-Man identity. He's literally becoming a spider. That's a great plot parallel, or narrative representation of what's going on intrinsically in the character manifesting outwardly. And of course, one of the major morals of the show is that if you can have a social support structure in your life, like, that is good to have. Now, it's not so simple in Spider-Man's case, and I'll stand by that. But what Ned and MJ, well, at least what MJ makes clear, is that it would have been her decision to stay in his life, not his. So in that way, she's consenting to whatever danger may arise for her. This prompts more deeper philosophical discussion as to what degree Spider-Man should be embracing his life as Peter Parker if he does indeed feel so responsibly called to be Spider-Man. And of course, that is explored many times throughout the comic books, and it's a completely different side discussion. But essentially, yeah, the moral of the movie was, and we see this through dialogue that Punisher says, hey, if, he's like, if the people I love are still breathing, I'd be spending as much time as I could with them. So it's, yeah, hey, maybe keeping them too close or too involved in your Spider-Man life is causing them danger, but ultimately it's their decision to stay with you, to stay with that. And, you might need them yourself to be an effective hero. So that was a great plot element. I enjoyed as well. Another positive that I really liked about this movie was just how integrated to the continuity it was. We had appearances like Yelena, who was the new Black Widow, even though that was brief and kind of just a plot device for serving as a catalyst to find something, or propel the plot forward a little bit, which is perfectly fine. But it's nice to see her in there. It's referencing the new Avengers and whatnot. Of course, we had the Punisher, who I'll talk a little bit more about length on later on. Then we had other cameos like Tarantula, Boomerang, Scorpion. We'll briefly mention those guys again later. Bruce Banner was in it. Hulk, he's obviously the one helping out with the inhibitor chip. And then Jean Grey is part of the, ushering in of the new X-Men era into the MCU, of course. So even though many of these other characters all collectively played small roles, like they're all kind of smaller components of the larger narrative, they were still in it. And that very much makes the movie feel connected to the MCU. It makes the universe feel more alive. I think just, the catch-all word for that is continuity. And I love seeing continuity in these connected universes. I think that's the most fun part about having everything all connected. So when it feels like it actually matters, or that the timeline is actually progressing for every single character, not just one, or cherry picking what has or hasn't progressed based upon who your focal point is for the film. I just really like that it feels well integrated into the continuity, and sometimes I feel like that's been a little bit absent from some of the multiverse saga projects, but that's once again a different side discussion. Comic book references were on point. We had a lot of just overt cover recreations in live action, which we love to see. And then many of the minor villains that I mentioned before, of course, taken straight from the comic books. My favorite instance of this was the Punisher carrying Spider-Man into the hospital, and although it was under very different circumstances in the comic books, there is no way it wasn't meant to parallel that really cool scene from Civil War where he's carrying the damaged Spider-Man away from the action. I always loved that panel, and that was actually one of the top things I said I wanted to see this movie once I realized Punisher was in it. So great to have that. Absolutely love it. And although I've sort of mentioned this throughout the positive section of this review, it's just good to say it explicitly. The relational component, right? The drama unfolding between him, Ned, and NJ is exactly the type of drama, right? The soapy kind of thing we want to see with Spider-Man, where no, not just how is he going to save the day, right? How it was going to go on to the villains. I want to see the Spider-Man action, but also the deeper emotional connections and in interrelationships of Peter Parker and how Spider-Man affects his personal life. That was well represented in this film as well. I mentioned, Ned and MJ and their relevance to what was going on in the grander narrative. So certainly that was one of my favorite elements. I would actually, if I had to pick a favorite scene from the whole movie, it would be either Punisher carrying him, but that's mostly just because of the comic book connections. Although it was great to see in the film, just in isolation as well. But I would have to say my favorite scene was when he took MJ to that rooftop and they start having that otherwise romantic moment, and then it's revealed that Jean Grey was actually in her head the whole time. It was at first sweet, and then it was haunting, right? So definitely, yeah, definitely my favorite. I think the scene that impacted me the most while watching the film. But of course, if I'm giving an honest review, I can't only sing the movie's praises. So again, while it's all subjective, let's get into some things that I felt the movie was lacking. I don't necessarily think that anything that happened was bad or I disliked anything I saw in the film, but rather there were some specific things I was looking for that I don't think I was fully presented. That I have to go over, and I don't know if critique is the right word because again, I think the film in of itself was a very well constructed and cohesive unit. But if I would have had, if I would have had my full way, we would have seen these things. And the major factor looming over the movie that I think deflated a lot of my hype for it, we'll discuss at the end. So just know we're building up to my major gripe with all of this. But first thing to mention is there was far too brief of cameos for the comic book inspired villains. We had Scorpion, we had Tarantula, we had Boomerang, we even had Tombstone. And most of these characters, except for Scorpion, were only on the screen for a little bit, just in the montage section, right? Which is fine to show that Spider-Man's active, that he's taken out crime in the city, and also feeding us comic book references. But I really wish we could have even just had some extended fights between Spider-Man and these villains. Like, as a fan, I'm excited to see characters I know from the comic books appear on the screen, or even cartoons, because there's a distinct vibe difference when it's live action. Even if I've read something a million times in a comic, seen it a million times in a cartoon, I'm still hyped to see their representation of it in live action. And I just feel like people like Tombstone, and especially Tombstone and then Scorpion, I was really hyped to see the live action versions of. And I feel like, you know, we get almost nothing, and the likelihood of getting too much more, I feel like, is pretty low just because it's kind of a been there, done that kind of situation, even though it was so brief. Like, give me just a couple minutes of fight with Boomerang, a couple minutes of a fight with Tombstone, or maybe just some really, really brief side plot, including Tombstone. Again, it's all problem with movies is there's so much time constraints. Like, you want to produce something that's easily watchable, that's not like an episodic series, and that's where comic books and cartoons always have the advantage because there's way less worry about that. Stories can unfold over multitude of issues or episodes, and the comic books come out like twice a month, so like there's a lot you can do within like a year. Where of course movie development takes a long time, and the movie itself can't be too long. So of course I get all that, which is why I don't really hold it as markings too much against the movie. I just really, really wish I would have seen more. I feel like they gave us enough Scorpion. I feel like I would just want basically the amount they gave us of Scorpion, but apply it to these other comic book villains that they inserted into the film. Because realistically, what we saw of the villains, we kind of saw in the trailer, and that'll come up later. Uh, and speaking of villainous type characters, we have the Punisher. He's more of an anti-hero, of course, but just not enough of the guy. Maybe not necessarily not enough screen time from him. I feel like they worked with his character as well as they could within the context of this being a Spider-Man film. Of course, his gritty side has to be inhibited a little bit just because it is PG-13 and not mature. And of course, it's Spider-Man, so you don't want to get too, violent or crass with what he says. But my favorite part about Spider-Man and Punisher interacting is the distinct contrast between their philosophies. Like, Spider-Man is like pathologically obsessed with keeping people alive. Whereas Punisher is just like, if you're to any reasonable villainous like extent of a person, you're done. Like, you're getting popped in the head or wherever else I can shoot you to end your days, right? Like, you are not getting the opportunity to hurt anyone else again. Whereas Spider-Man is, like I said, pathologically obsessed with keeping people alive. This is represented slightly less in the films. He generally is a merciful hero, or a hero that doesn't want to murder his villains, of course, wants to send them off to jail, wants to capture them, incapacitate them, right? But in the comics, this is displayed time and time again to a, I would call it an obsessive degree. Like, he goes out of his way, like he straight up took a bullet for Norman Osborn. That wasn't just him not killing Norman Osborn, that was him actively taking a bullet for his worst enemy. And so it's just like, it's one of those things where I truly think he's become obsessed with it in the comic books. And I would consider it a virtue. It's one of the most impressive things about his character. But this wasn't contrasted all that much to Punisher. It briefly was, right? Like, he had to web up two of his guns. Punisher's like, oh, I'm going to do this my way if this goes wrong. And of course, he tries to kill Jean Grey, in which Spider-Man has his taking a bullet moment, which leads to one of my favorite scenes, of course, of the Punisher carrying him to the hospital, showing a softer side of Punisher and a tougher side of Spider-Man, so to speak. Of course, Spider-Man is being sacrificial about it. But yeah, I don't know. So where this gets tricky is that whole collision of conflicting philosophies was well represented in the Daredevil show, where Punisher is the most relevant in the MCU so far. We got that philosophy conflict representation really well written and well done, with, of course, Daredevil being the Catholic hero focused on redemption. I just feel like Spider-Man is known in the fan base and just in the general Marvel universe so specifically for wanting to keep even bad guys alive. It's to a point that it even surpasses Daredevil. Like, I feel like Spider-Man's the poster child of a mercy focused hero beyond Matt Murdock, And so I just feel like I would have loved to see that contrast a little more accentuated between him and Punisher. And I think we're supposed to indicate that they've had a little bit more tussles in the past, with, of course, the whole Staten Island thing where Spider-Man saved Punisher. Again, I really wish we got some sort of, well, not again, I haven't said this yet. Again, having a problem with Spider-Man and Punisher's relationship in the film. I really wish we could have gotten a flashback of that or some proper scene of that. I do think it reflects a certain maturity in writing to not have to have everything transpire on screen, but rather have lore that is obvious through dialogue and character interactions, so that we know what happened without seeing what happened. I do think that reflects good writing. But again, as a fan, I just really wish I could have seen Spider-Man and Punisher meeting for the first time and have, more philosophy collision between Peter and Frank Castle. I feel like that would just, I don't know, that would have really tickled the spot that I was getting ready, when I was seeing the trailers for this film. But yeah, again, we do get that really good in Daredevil, so I can't complain about it too much. One minor problem I had is a very predictable villain reveal. Like, the damage control guy, I don't know if it was the cinematography more than what he was actually saying or what, but something was really suspicious about him from the beginning. So I was like, okay, if a twist villain reveal is going to happen, it is going to be this guy. And then, of course, Jean Grey being the villain was something that fans were speculating for so long that even though they were kind of keeping, like, who is Sadie Sink going to be in this show? Like, everyone kind of knew, especially when it is confirmed in hindsight. You're like, yeah, well, so we all expected that. So I feel like any expectation subversion that could have been had as through the major big bads of the movie fell on its face for me, just because we like, it was obvious from the beginning. And then my next point, and sorry if there's seemingly like too many complaints here, I genuinely like the film, and I know a lot of people are saying it is like one of their favorite Spider-Mans. I'm not quite sure if that's true for me. I like all Spider-Man, so it's kind of an Olympic difference at that point, but this might be a little unfair because we did get some of this, but I felt like there was a realistically pretty brief actual cityscape action. We got some web slinging, which I really wanted, especially in the more classical cloth suit that he's now wearing in this show. But I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I was left wanting for web slinging. I don't know if that makes sense. Like everyone compares like Toby and Tom's older web slinging to Andrew's web slinging, especially in ASM 2, which is a lot more, I feel like, creatively done or chaotically done in such a way that you feel like well represents the bouncy agility of Spider-Man. In this, they took a lot of unique camera angles, which I think was really cool. And they did a lot of slow motion and zoom ups and all those technical film terms that really made for a unique viewing experience of Spider-Man's daily life as a hero. Now for the final thing I'm going to bring up, and the probably the most major element to all of this that deflated my enjoyment of the movie. Again, I did like the film, but I was left a little underwhelmed or wanting, I suppose, even at the end. And I feel like the most major contributing factor to that was the trailer designs. The trailers genuinely revealed pretty much everything that was going to transpire in this film. If you don't believe me, go back and watch all of the the teasers and the trailers that they revealed on socials leading up to this film. With hindsight, knowing exactly what happened in the film, go watch those trailers and tell me they didn't just like reveal the whole thing. The major cameos, like or not cameos, the major character inclusions from other Marvel media, the Punisher, the Hulk, were shown and revealed straight up in there. The major thing happening to Peter, the metamorphosis, the arachnid metamorphosis occurring to him, was well shown in the trailer. His fight style, swinging style, even some of the comic book cover recreations, his web style, like all of that was represented pretty well in the trailers. Even many of the villain cameos that we get, and just some of the crucial moments of the fight scenes we even see straight up in the trailer. Even some of the dialogue between him and his friends who still don't remember him, we know is going to happen in a certain method in a certain location due to some of the trailer reveals. Genuinely, I went to this movie probably expecting too much to be under the hood. Like I said, the Jean Grey thing became obvious once listening to the fan theories, and when you see, the mind hopping ability, we even saw that in a trailer leading up to all of this, so that became pretty clear what some of the main source of drama is going to be. Genuinely, there was not much covered up for this movie. I came in expecting my expectation to be subverted in some way because of how much I saw in the trailer, or there to be this whole other plot thread in the movie that was they reserved under the hood, or something crazier, right? Something that would leave me more hyped, but not really. Realistically, how many times I watched all the trailers, what I expected out of this movie and what I predicted to get is exactly what they gave. And I'm not saying there needs to be some when I say subversion, I don't mean some huge like plot twist or crazy like Sixth Sense reveal here. I just want something that I couldn't have pieced together pretty in a well-informed way from the trailers that were leading up to the film. And again, please go watch the trailers if you've watched the movie already, because you'll probably see what I mean. And it's almost one of those things where I wish I didn't scrutinize or study the trailers too much or even think about them. In this case, I kind of wish I didn't even watch them. Like, imagine sitting in the theater not knowing Punisher was going to show up or not knowing Hulk was going to show up. Like, that would make those moments so much more hype. But instead, you're just kind of waiting for them to happen and then seeing what unfolds as they do. Genuinely, if you had enough prowess for predicting narratives, if you watched the trailers, you could have pieced together exactly what was going to happen to this movie almost down to a T. It's literally just the glue that we didn't get in the trailers, if you ask me. And that kind of, I feel like that's what left me underwhelmed, because this was a great film. Somehow I have to explain, and I'm a Spider-Man fan, right? I love all Spider-Man media. I have to explain why there's this feeling of, being underwhelmed inside of me. And the best way I can explain it is that exactly what I expected to happen happened. And not only that, because like I said, there doesn't need to be a twist, but like what I've already saw happened, and not much more, I don't know. Feel free to disagree with me on that. I might be being way too picky, especially in relation to my, I've consumed a lot of Spider-Man media, so maybe I just know how it all happens, right? But let me know. I did think it was a great film, but again, I'm left struggling to articulate why I didn't feel as hyped as I have about other Spider-Man movies that I've watched in the past. Yeah, that's kind of my main review, and I think what I should leave this off on is maybe my hopes for the future of the Tom Holland Spider-Man, of the MCU continuity. Of course, the post-credit scene, I can only imagine. Comment if this means something more specific that I don't and I'm not aware of. I can only imagine it's setting him up for Secret Wars to some degree, with the the space imagery, the location implying that Spider-Man is beyond Earth again. So I can only imagine that's setting up for some Secret Wars related thing. But I need to see Spider-Man Secret Wars. I would even like him to get the symbiote in Secret Wars because that's what happened in the comics. I don't know if they can go that direction or even want to with the whole Venom thing that's already gone down on the Sony side of things. But genuinely, I would love to see Spider-Man in Secret Wars. I think he kind of has to be, right? Like he's a big name, and if it's kind of one of those accumulative Avengers movies, I feel like you'd want to have every major player involved. But who knows? I guess I can only imagine that post-credit scene setting up for Secret Wars. So yeah, hopes for the future. Want to see Tom Holland Spider-Man in Secret Wars. Love to see him get a symbiote there. The next movie, I mean, obviously, we're going to get a relationship growth between him and Ned, like a regrowth almost, or a restoration of what they had, I would imagine. But I also keep waiting for something weird to happen with Ned. Of course, Ned leads immediately any comic book fan, brings thoughts of Hobgoblin, and then they've already related him to having some sort of magic in his veins in the No Way Home movie. I keep waiting for something weird to happen with Ned, whether that be villainous or otherwise. So I'd certainly like to see that going forward as well. And I would say I'd like to see a Black Cat, but I would like to see Black Cat under the circumstances of her being able to be flirtatious with Peter, which means I do not want him to be with MJ if that happens. So there's some things that I'm like, I'd like to see him back with Michelle Jones again, but I would like to see him, I'd like to see a live action Black Cat properly done. So of course, under that, pretense of that happening, maybe hold off on him getting back with MJ again for a while. But yeah, let me know what you guys think you'd want out of the future. Those are just some ideas I'm kind of spitballing right now. But yeah, if you like discussing Spider-Man related stuff in a very casual demeanor like this, certainly subscribe to the channel. Please leave a like, please leave a comment. I'll read them all. I like interacting with them as well. So I love hearing differing thoughts and opinion and discussion surrounding, my favorite character in fiction. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you in the next video I make. Likely, I'm probably going to rank all the Spider-Man movies with my thoughts on, Spider-Man Brand New Day affecting the tier list. So be on the lookout for that, and hopefully I'll see you again next time.